Hello and welcome to the Practical Leadership Podcast, where leaders share their tools and practical advice to make you a better leader today. My name is Max Kozlowski. I'll be your host, and today I have a very special guest. He's a legend in the startup business, but we're going to do intro a little bit different. I'm actually going to let him do his own intro because he's got a lot of things you want to know and learn about. So, Michael, how are you today?
That's super fun. My name is Michael Girdley. I'm from San Antonio, Texas. I am an entrepreneur and investor. I run a holding company that has significant stakes or whole ownership of about a dozen businesses, everything from fireworks to education to real estate to software and other stuff as well. So spend my days being on boards, creating new companies, helping companies grow, and supporting the CEOs that run those businesses.
The entrepreneurial dream, if I have to say so myself. Plus, you have a wonderful podcast where you talk about businesses, super exciting stuff. If you want to learn about what to buy, what not to buy, why to buy it, and how experts look at businesses, you cannot miss it. You've got a newsletter where you're always sharing business advice from the real world. No theory, just like I've done it, I've learned from it. People must learn from that as well. In a wonderful course, if you want to learn how to run several businesses without actually being in the day-to-day of them and have a holding company, right? I think that's what you call it. Then I mean, they've got to definitely check you out.
Yeah, super cool. Yeah, and on the podcast front, I've started 5 podcasts and 4 of them have failed. So there's an entrepreneurship lesson in there somewhere. So
I bet. So before we get into the big subject, what's something good, fun, positive that's happened in your world in the last few weeks or months?
let's see. The fireworks season just finished up. That's one of our main businesses, and that was my very first business that I was the CEO of. So it's good to get past that and then take a nap today, it being July the 5th. We're coming up on the 5th month that my course has been out, and it still keeps selling every month. And we have a great little community of people that are part of that. Over 100 people have become members of that, and so that's been going great as well. And one of those businesses is very hard, and one of those businesses is very easy. And I'll leave it to you to figure out which one is which.
Very cool. So no surprise when you're managing, working, leading 12 different businesses. There's going to be lots of ups and downs and wins. So not surprised that there's going to be some good things happening there. So Michael, let's kind of start at the beginning with the big idea of leadership, right? I'm very curious to know how did you first kind of understood the concept of leadership, how you became aware that there's people that are leaders and then there's the rest of us. How did you first learn about that idea?
Yeah, well, I learned a lot and was, one of those people that we talk about people being born on home plate or whatever and having to pull themselves up by their bootstrap. I'm very extremely fortunate. I grew up here in San Antonio to 2 loving parents who were entrepreneurs and ran our family business. And I got to see the backside of leadership right around the dinner table every day, and learned so much from my dad and from my mother, who are still wonderful parts of my life. And that was really what first exposed me to it, right? Because I had watched my father go through his journey where my grandfather, who was his original business partner, he joined him in the 70s. And my grandfather was not a hungry entrepreneur. He was a people person, and watched my dad enter into that world and really put his mark on it as somebody who really is a business builder and a competitive person. And to do that and to really grow business, you have to be a leader that can motivate people, keep the right people around, and do that not only internally, but also with your customers and partners and service providers and all that kind of stuff. So, I saw it from an early age, just because I'm gifted by having a great family that has given me a lot of opportunity in life.
So you discovered it by like seeing it in action yourself, but there was no real discussion or conversation about leadership. It's just like second nature what people were doing. Is that kind of what I'm getting?
For sure. I think if you want to be an entrepreneur, the greatest way to be an entrepreneur is to spend time with other entrepreneurs, right? The data has shown that the greatest chance that you have to become a startup founder is to go work at a startup. That's just straightforward there. And so those of us that are fortunate to be born to entrepreneurial parents who are being leaders in the house, they don't even know they're teaching you things, right? And it's kind of like with our kids. My experience is kind of the best thing you can do as a parent is just be a good person. And because the kids are going to listen so much more to what you do than to what you say. And I think as I look back on it, I don't really think I heard the word leadership from my parents. I don't think they thought about it that way at all. But at its core, they were practicing what we today, think of as the study and science of leadership for sure.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I had a similar experience where the concept of leadership didn't show up as a concept until much later in my life, but there
Right.
was leadership. But for some people, there's like leadership concepts taught, explained, whether in sports or organizations. So it's always very interesting to see like the difference in the concepts and how people kind of go through that phase.
100%.
So, 12 holding companies or 12 companies that you're part of as a chairman or as a CEO, a co-founder. People come to you with ideas all the time. They come to you for help, for advice. When it comes to leadership and leading people, what do you think is like the biggest mindset or philosophy principles that you follow? And you kind of gave us a little glimpse of it, right? But what's your approach?
I think it's really interesting. For me, I really love the servant leadership approach, and a lot of that ties back to really, as I've gotten older, I'm 48 now, have spent a lot of time thinking about my personal why, like the Simon Sinek why. If you're familiar with his books and that sort of thing. But to me, as I've gotten older and taken long walks in the woods and stuff, and then watched what gives me joy in terms of what I do every day, I think, we talk about the idea for the biblical parallel of like the parable of like you teach a man to fish, you give him a fish, right? And I think about what really gives me the most joy is neither one of those things. What gives me the most joy is making the pond stocked full of fish for somebody to come in and find their way in there and be successful. And, I think that really translates into what I do all day. Like in practice, I spend a ton of time in one-on-ones with CEOs running companies. I'm helping them as a partner in projects or problems that they're trying to solve, but I'm not solving the problem for them. And very rarely am I telling a company you have to do something this way or that way. I am instead doing the work to understand where they're coming from, what's going on, listening to them, providing input, and then most importantly, taking that and then saying, oh, now I trust you based on this data, this input, to go make the right decision that's going to work for all of us and be entrepreneurial in that way and make it happen. So I don't know what that conceptually is. I've heard it talked about as servant leadership, but I think that's how I best tend to help people is by being a partner and the person behind them rather than their boss. And, I think that translates into how I do everything and how I structure stuff and hopefully how it continues scaling and growing.
So I've, Socratic method coaching is what it kind of sounds like. How did you come about? How did you figure out that you shouldn't be telling people what to do? Because you've got a lot of experience, you see a lot of things. I am sure that, any problem, you've got a solution in mind, but you probably restrained yourself from going right after the solution and kind of telling them what to do and instead help them come up with their own ideas and their own direction. How did you first figure that that was the best approach for you or the best approach? Because I think that's the right approach when helping others.
Yeah.
How'd that come about? Did it click one day?
100%, it's been a journey. So as a younger person, I definitely, in areas of my expertise, I definitely would do the smartest guy in the room kind of stuff. Like, hey, let me tell you how it is. Let me jump to conclusions. I got this all figured out. And I think what really educated me a lot on that was watching my advice and really realizing how wrong I often was. And yeah, even if I have an 80% hit rate, I'm still wrong 20% of the time. And so for me, it was really a transformation to say like, look, I need to, if I want this to scale, I need to be in a position where I slow down. I make sure I understand all the facts. I listen to what the people are saying. I also listen behind what they're saying and understand what they really need. And sometimes CEOs will come to you in my position and they'll be saying, give me some input on this. Other times, there will be times where they say, "Tell me what to do," and I'll ask, like, "What are you looking for me here? Do you want me to tell you the answer?" Yes, and they'll say, "Yes, I am in a hurry, so just tell me what to do." And so I think as I've gotten older, I've become much more sensitive to the dynamic of what's going on in the room, what the person's solving for. And then also just, I think, realistic enough to know if there's a CEO who's running a company and I'm just a board chairman spending 2 or 3 days a month on it, and they're in there every day fighting and in the weeds. At best, I'm going to offer a different perspective, but I'm not going to offer better facts than what they have. And I think there's that level of trust and understanding of my own personal limitations that has transformed me from being overconfident in my ways and being much more collaborative in terms of understanding where I'm strong and where I'm not strong.
I really appreciate that for our listeners out there, right? It's a process of self-awareness. I really I believe that it's difficult to go from smartest person in the room to, a contributor in the room, in that it's kind of like a journey. And I see that with young entrepreneurs. I'm sure you see that too. I'm sure you talk to your CEOs and explain how they themselves have to be better at doing that. And I just really appreciate that self-awareness of being able to keep track of your success, which, like anybody comes to you with an 80% success rate. I'm like, well, just tell me what to do, right? I mean, I'm going to follow that, but then you end up not developing people. You end up, I love the work from Liz Wiseman in multipliers, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you become an accidental diminisher, and you're saying, I don't want to be that. I want to be supportive. And the other thing that I love is sometimes people just want an answer, right? And that's okay too,
Yeah.
right? That's okay. I mean, yes, I believe we need to be coaching more than kind of consulting or directing, but there's times where you just need to give people what they need, and it's an answer, and move forward. So
Yeah.
it was a bunch of experience. Sorry.
And there's an interesting balance there where each year I do this process where my business coach goes through and does a 360 review by interviewing everybody that I work closest with, and then distills that back into anonymized feedback for me. And it'll be sometimes years where people are like, "Hey, Michael's not leaning in enough," and we feel like he's holding back. And sometimes I am, because also, like, if you're going to tell people your strong opinion, you need to slow down and actually listen, or it may not be the right time to express your opinion. So reading the room there is super important. And then the other times you come back and be like, Michael's being like, too much the smartest guy in the room. And I don't want to imply that I think I'm the smartest guy in the room. I'm just saying sometimes I acted like one. So, it's a journey to kind of find that right balance and try to get into a groove around that stuff. But yeah, I get the feedback too. It's like, I think Michael's holding back. Well, yeah, sometimes I am, because I think it's the best thing to do. So sometimes you don't want to give an opinion, and you just got to read the room.
You just gave us so much there. There's like 3 different doors I can go through. I'll start with a simple one. So here's the thing, right? You've got an opportunity to be looking deeply inside 12 companies per year.
Right.
So every year of your experience is 12 years of the CEO or owner of one business, right? So the cumulative experience that you bring to the table and what you've seen is significantly larger than the typical CEO that's only been looking at one business, and your experience is definitely valuable. And there's an element of all that experience that you can also see a few steps ahead. So you're like, oh man, I know where that's going to end up, and it's challenging to take a deep breath and help the team. But here's something. I think this might be a little self-serving, but I'm going to say it anyway. You're like, wait a minute, you're chairman of all these businesses, you invest in companies, people come to you for business advice all the time, and you mentioned you have a coach. How come?
Yeah. I don't know. No, I do know why. Like, Michael Jordan had a coach, and Kobe Bryant had coaches, and well, here in San Antonio, Wimbayama has coaches and therapists and all this kind of stuff. And I think that's that's a journey everybody needs to make to understand the right way to go about life, or at least the right way to go about life for me is to be on that journey of continual self-improvement that never stops. And, what I discovered over time was there were things that I would describe as just these black boxes. And they were things that it was almost like I would look into the box and I just couldn't even understand what the box was. I didn't understand what shape it was. I just didn't, and it'd be concepts like, hey, Michael, go, tell me how strategic partnerships with a very large corporation works. And I'm just like, nope, don't understand how that works at all. And, as I spent time seeing that in life, I realized I needed help to find another perspective and for somebody to slow down and, from a perspective of trust, get into my head and help me unlock those things. And so I have a business coach, been with him for 7, 8 years now. He's here in San Antonio. And that's sometimes he'll explain stuff to me from the 360 and it'll just be like, okay, everybody says this. And I'm like, nope, I don't understand that at all. Try it again. And then, okay, now try it like I'm 8. And that, nope, don't understand that. Try it like I'm 5. And then maybe we get there. And then sometimes you need to try again next week. Because there's just some things that, for every strength that we have as a human being of perspective, there are weaknesses that come behind it and things that I just can't understand. And so that's what he does, and calls me out of my BS and helps me stay on this kind of growth mindset trajectory that I think is the right place to be as a human being.
I appreciate that. As most of my audience knows, I've been coaching a while myself, and I see the importance and value of it. And one of the questions that sometimes I get asked, well, shouldn't the business owner already know? Aren't they the expert? What do they need from you? And of course, there's all these different perspectives, but when you get to verbalize it, it makes hopefully so much more sense for more people. And I think you can't go at it alone, and we all have blind spots that we need to see. And I really appreciate that you're looking for that feedback. And for the audience out there, I just really think that you can learn a lot from your experience and your vulnerability, saying, I don't understand it, right? Like sometimes it's so difficult for people to just say, I don't get it. Help me understand it better, because there's like these expectations that come from the world that you should know it all, that you should be able to figure everything out, that you should understand it. And then we don't, and then we make bad decisions because we didn't say, I didn't get it. I didn't understand.
Right.
I think a lot of that comes from like, I call it 1950s corporate America culture, right? Where you had to always be right and always be in control and always make the decisions. But those times are long gone, right? I think vulnerability and being genuine and open, recognizing that if you have faults, you're not at risk, what's going to help you learn is critical for everyone out there. So
well, it's also, corporate America to some extent is a byproduct of the way we run school for ourselves as young people, right? You and I don't know your level of product of the United States, like higher education system, but you have to show up with the right answer or you're wrong, right? You have to be good at everything or that's a mistake. Like those are not the way things actually work in the real world. Like we expect you to say when you don't know stuff, and you're dumb if you spend too much time working on things where you're terrible and you have no talent. Like you shouldn't be doing that. Like you should be working into your strengths. And so, I think a lot of it is interesting as an opportunity as education evolves over the next 50 years or so to rethink that, especially for the modern world that isn't all factories and templates anymore.
I never thought about that. It's the education system forms you, and then you go into business, corporate, and you're expecting it to operate the same way when in reality it doesn't. Tell me a little bit about, you're talking about working and playing to your strengths, not your weaknesses. It's not, if you don't have the right answer, then you're wrong and you fail. Tell me a little bit about that. Where did you figure that out, that you've got to play to your strengths and focus on that versus having to be right and get everything?
Yeah, it's not an idea I made up. I think the original kind of idea that I saw around that was a book called Now Discover Your Strengths, or First Something Strengths. It was a book in the late 90s. It was from the Strengths Finder at Gallup folks, and it was basically like, if you do the math and you ask yourself, should I spend time making my underperforming employee okay, or should I spend time making my great, as a manager, should I spend time making my great employee super great? And most intuition is they spend all their time helping their underperforming employee get average, as opposed to helping them just find a new job where they can thrive, rather than spending their time making their very best people perform more. And it's counterintuitive around that. And so as I dug into that and I saw that as a first-time manager, I started to think about that in terms of just the math of game theory and me as well. Like, would I be better off trying to get 10% better at the things that I'm really good at, or would it be better trying to get really good at the high jump? And by the way, like I'm Caucasian American and I'm very Caucasian, right? Like the whole white men can't jump thing, definitely. Like I have no vertical. Where should I spend my time, right? Should I spend my time being a better at what I'm good at, or should I spend my time trying to go from awful to less awful at my weaknesses? And I think the math shows you that, game theory, you read some basic game theory books, like that's exactly what you should do. So that's how I end up understanding. And it goes back to this kind of idea of being in a growth mindset, reading, open-minded, change your mind, learn new skills, and put those to practice in your life.
And it also makes for happier people, right? I mean,
Oh yeah.
we suffer less when
Yeah, it turns out you enjoy more doing the things that you're good at. Like, you should just do more of the things you're good at. You'll be happier.
Yeah. And that gets us into a whole other conversation, maybe for another day. But, like I heard people say, well, work's called work and it's not supposed to be fun, and all those type of like comments where, it's like you're getting paid, so you should hate it. Right. Versus, you should really be doing the stuff that you love. So how do you bring some of these ideas into practice in your businesses? How do you convert all these, all the knowledge, the experience, the skills, and kind of bring it in so they become like an extension of your mindset?
Yeah. Well, once your company starts to get to a certain size and you're not, employing all the people yourself or hiring all the people yourself, you have to impact those companies through systems and then also through culture, right? And so unpack those, culture is something that I've really dug into a lot over the past years to think about how to craft that. I think there's things I've learned about how to go after that in terms of defining the behaviors you want to see in your organization and then also demonstrating them. Those are really important. And then second is systems, repeatable, standardized systems, which I'm a huge believer in, are ones that I try to impact all my companies with by saying, hey, here's the best system I found to do hiring or marketing or customer satisfaction or strategic planning. And we're going to all just use this one. And we're going to use this one, and we could change it if you want. But here's the deal. You have to give me one that's better than the one we have, and then we'll all use that one and we can standardize it. It makes my life a lot easier. So for me, it's those two things, like how do I define culture and be a leader in terms of pushing that towards the folks that I interact with all the time in the companies? And then secondarily, how do I define the systems that are best of breed to solve the 80% of problems that every business has, and nobody has a standardized way of solving them unless you adopt one of these systems. So that's how I do it.
That's fantastic. And so let's talk about systems for a second, then we can jump a little bit into culture. So how do you define what the best system is? There's a quote out there that I really love, which is there's only one best way of doing anything, and you're trying to figure out what that is and keeping everything up to speed with it. How do you go about continuing to develop the best systems, the best in class, and then implementing them throughout the organizations, which I'm also sure gives you a lot of what's the word that I'm looking for here? Some synergy and speed, because then not everybody has to be reinventing the wheel. So it gives, speed and momentum.
Yeah. And it gives me, say, for example, if we're all using the same strategic planning methodology, it gives me a common language to interface with everybody, and I don't have to learn everybody's different systems. So, I mean, in terms of finding those systems, I think my story with regards to how I think about systems tied back to making some bad hires that weren't good fits. And, the idea that even if you don't have a premeditated system in your business, you have a system. It's just not written down, and it's probably pretty bad. I went through a journey with hiring where, I would do some of the classical things where you would do trick questions or just drop $100 on the floor and see what the people did, and discover those are actually really terrible to let you know if somebody's going to be a good fit for your job or not. And over time, friends, colleagues, clued me into stuff. They're like, hey, read this book or take a look at this particular tool. And, I spent several years going out and trying to understand what were the best of breed for these kind of taste like chicken problems that every business has around hiring, strategic planning, vision definition, culture, all that kind of stuff, and then use that as a way to go and interview folks and look at all of them and say, okay, well, what are you using? What do you like? What do you don't like? And spend a couple of years doing that. And I ended up with a set of systems that, I refer to as the playbook. They're all stuff that actually I've listed in a document on my website, girdley.com. You can go look at it if you like. And it's all stuff that's just like $12 books. It's like, here's how you should do hiring. Okay, I like the top grading methodology. And here's how I put that together with some quantitative, tests that I use to test general mental aptitude or culture fit or any of that kind of stuff, and put that all together in a system and say, okay, like I spent 2 years looking at all this. I looked at all the best, and here's the system that I like to use. And that's how I ended up there. It all came from a personal problem where I was frustrated with losing a lot of money when I hired people that didn't work out.
Wow. Really appreciate something that you're sharing. And I think it's really important for everyone that aspires to do great things out there. So, number one, it's learn from others, right? If somebody already solved the problem, go to Girdley.com and figure out how, Michael has been able to solve this and what are the systems and the books and the content that is already out there. Hire someone that already has solved that problem and can help you expedite through it. But I also appreciate like your intention and how you utilize your time really wisely, meaning you're not in operations of all these businesses, which then allows you to look at these critical infrastructures and macro systems that are going to be running in all the different organizations, which then again starts giving your groups a lot of synergy and power. So for the businesses out there, right, we always talk about the idea of working on your business versus working in your business, and in your arm that's working on the business and figuring out how to make it better. It sounds like you take a deep dive, and by that it's not for a week or a month. I mean, you're mentioning going into these concepts for years to really solve it.
Yeah, and if you're going to make if you want to make a high impact decision like that, you want to do the right decision. So yeah, just the way it works. So,
yeah. And do most of your solutions come from frustration, from a problem, from seeing the waste, losing money, not getting things done right, and kind of that inspires you?
100%. I mean, I think if you look at kind of the way the personality assessments will say my brain is wired and what matters to me, tangible results matter. And that's accentuated more by me being Gen X. That's just the way we think. We don't care how you get there. We just care what the outcome is. If you talk to a lot of Gen X people, they'll say like, I don't care if you show up 1 hour a week. If you're the best salesman I ever have and you bring in $1 million, like other generations don't think that way. Like, boomers are like, wait, you're not in the office. You're not working hard. Well, then that doesn't count. It doesn't matter what your results are. And, I think that's just naturally hardwired, and then it's accentuated by generational differences as well. And to me, I want to live in a results-based thing, and that's where I get frustrated with stuff that's not working. And I'm not interested in the least in theoretical. Like, there's this whole class of people on Twitter, like they love to just hang out and love theoretical, impractical ideas. And it's just like, I'm so bored by it. I have no interest whatsoever, because it's all about results and making impact for me. And I lean into that. And so, yeah, that ends up being why I choose and work on certain stuff. It's because I want to change what's going on in the world around me to shape what I want it to be.
So outcomes, right? So important. That kind of connects really well with, why you're in charge or part of or contributing to all these companies. The other big idea, you talk about culture. And again, if anybody's watched any of my podcasts, the subject of culture unequivocally shows up. But how to actually make it come to life, how to implement culture is still a mystery for a lot of companies. And I think they also have a lot of misconceptions, and they have a lot of ideas that are just not focused on the implementation and on the practical side of things. So I'm super curious, what are some of the ways that you make culture come to life? You mentioned behaviors and kind of modeling. How do you do it? Give us some ideas.
Yeah. And there's one of the systems we like to use is called EOS, and it's it's basically a business paint by numbers strategic thing. There's a number of these out there, great game of business, scaling up, all that kind of stuff. And most of them have a level of some sort of definition of core values and that sort of thing. And I think the conclusion that I've had watching companies do core values is our classic kind of way of defining core values is really fundamentally broken. It doesn't really work, right? Like if you go look at Enron, you remember Enron, the big fraud. Did you know one of the core values was integrity? So clearly that doesn't work, right? Like integrity, honesty, transparency, like nope, none of that happens, right? So clearly that doesn't really work in terms of how you think about it. And I think the fundamental problem is when you define core values that way, like we're going to be high integrity or we're going to be customer centric. Let's take that one. Customer centric. What does that mean in practice to an individual contributor? And that's how people do core values. And they expect people just to just to translate that into practice. And it's pretty easy. Like when you're like, we're going to be customer centric. Okay, we're going to make people happy. But if you think about like Southwest Airlines, right? Before they became recently terrible, like they used to be like amazing in terms of their ratings. But you would see actually there were times where they would actually decide the customer wasn't always right and would push back on you, but still people love them, right? Because there was a line that they figured out in terms of their behavior to be reasonable. But that area in terms of how an individual employee on the front line figures out where to draw the line to say no to a customer eventually, like if you say we're customer centric in your core values, like that's not going to solve that for an individual contributor. It's not actionable in the least. One of the things I ran across is there's a book called Culture by Design, where this guy who's actually not that great of a communicator because he's kind of abrasive, but like he created a system to define the core behaviors that he wants to see in his organization. Because that actually in practice is what you care about, right? Your culture is the behaviors that you encourage and the anti-behaviors that you don't tolerate. And so what he did was come up with a system where he defines the 20 to 25 core behaviors that he wants to see out of his organization. And then he created a system to basically drill those into people to where that became the universal of everybody. And I watched, one of my buddies use this system in his staffing business here in San Antonio, and it was transformative, right? Like, and these behaviors are things like we return phone calls the same day. Like, okay, well, that tells me really what we care about here, right? Like, Rackspace used to have one where it was like, we answer by the third ring. You can call anytime you want. And like, that tells me that is a defined core behavior that really matters, which is very different than putting customer centric, right, in your core values, which is totally not actionable. Like, what does that mean if I'm an individual? So I love that system. To varying degrees, my companies are in the process of rolling it out, where they do that inside the company and go from there. And I have not done it at the whole co level yet, but at some point I will do that in terms of defining our organization and actually living what I proselytize to people. But anyway, that's the core way of I think about core values. And here I'll keep going. But the other thing I've learned about core values, nobody wants to talk about them. Only business nerds want to talk about them. Like there's just like 10% of us that actually care about core values. Nobody else cares. Like I write about them on Twitter all the time and it's just like crickets. Like, so thank you for asking about them. It's exciting to see somebody actually want to talk about them, but nobody really gives a crap. It's one of the most interesting things about being a teacher on social media.
And thanks for sharing that approach. I'll just give you a couple of my thoughts here. And I think that one of the reasons why people don't like to talk much about it is because they don't know what to do with it. Mm-hmm. Right? Like conceptually, it's so important, but I don't know what to do with it. And then I see companies that have mission, vision, purpose statements on a wall somewhere, and the wording is horrible. Nobody remembers or recognizes anything, and they don't know what to do with it. Right. So I like to use guiding principles and behaviors. Right. So you've got these big ideas that, at any point, anybody can kind of look at them and know what direction they need to be moving in. And then definitely discovering the behaviors. The key that I found is that these big ideas need to be discovered.
Yeah.
And what I tell clients that I work with is we're going to get some ideas out on paper so we could start examining them and really recognizing whether they are real or aspirational. But it's going to take us a year to find the ones that really matter. And one of my keys is, these behaviors that generate a lot of emotion, either positive emotion or negative emotion, right? And that's what kind of creates a trigger, because then that's associated with deeper values, and that you will live up to values because, we as humans, it's like our main operating system. So, that's kind of my approach, discovering them with emotion and being able to connect them to real cultural values in the way that we've been programmed, brought up in life makes a big difference.
Yeah, love it.
Culture by design. I really believe culture is an action sport. You actually have to do things to make it come to life as well. So, okay, we've talked about culture. We've talked about systems. We've talked about like a coaching approach and giving people what they want and need, but by helping them develop, right? Not just providing the answers. Really understanding the conditions, and based on those conditions, as you called it, reading the room. You've got to be adapting your approach, and therefore you kind of know what to do or how to better behave. So tell us a little bit about that, right? Because if we're going to be better leaders, that means we've got to help people better, and to help them better, we need to understand the situation and we need to understand what they need. How do you do it, right? Like you're in a board, the CEO is there having a conversation, maybe they have their management team there. What are you trying to look for in order to understand what they really want or need?
Yeah, and I think that's a great question. Fundamentally, to succeed in the boardroom, I think you have to invest the time outside of the boardroom to develop a high level of trust and understanding with your people, right? That are on the operational side, right? So that means, going to lunch with the CEO on a regular basis, understanding what they're interested in as a person, understanding, what they're trying to accomplish, and then using that as the lens to understand what we talk about, what the company is trying to do and what they're trying to do for the company. And all of that holistically kind of fits together to understand the perspective of where people are coming from. And I think without that level of trust, and I see a lot of people try to do it where you're on 12 boards, but you never talk to the CEO outside of the board meeting. Yeah, no crap. You're not going to really be able to read the room well in that kind of situation. Because it's easy to go in, I think, in a board meeting and be very passive, say milquetoast stuff, and never challenge the CEO, never challenge the strategy, never speak truth to power in terms of what's going on. But it's also very difficult to go in and do that if you haven't built up a level of trust beforehand to understand the context of what they're saying and be deeply involved. And so, that's really how I think about it. And, I talked about, I'm exhausted today because I've had 3 long days supporting one of our companies, and that's intentional, right? That's how I do a good job. And that's both, I think, a direct commitment by me to do the work required to succeed in the boardroom and help the leadership succeed. But I think it's also important. I want them to see that I'm doing that. Right. I want them to know that I care enough to support them, and I'm, going to go in as a servant leader and do the work required to make sure we be successful. And so I don't know if I answer your question, but that's really how I think about it. And then there's some EQ, I think, involved in just making sure you're paying attention and what's going on in the room. But none of that really matters if you don't do the work ahead of time to really understand both the people and the business situation that you're walking into.
Really appreciate that approach, right? Like, so much in life is about preparation. And you're saying, hey, how I can't perform if I haven't invested the time, if I haven't invested the energy, if I haven't done the training, which in this case is building trust, and it's building understanding and knowing what they want. And I really appreciate what you said. It's not just what they want for the business, it's what they want for themselves.
Right.
I'm sure you're looking for alignment between what the individual wants, what the business wants to achieve, and you're looking for, things that are not well aligned or connected to, come up with some of the possible issues, or where, the individuals are going in one direction, the company's going in another, but you couldn't see that unless you're in there and having the conversations and talking to the people as real people, and understanding the business and understanding the company's aspirations and their goals and all these different things. And it's about doing all that pre-work. And I can't tell you how many times I talk to people that, as you said, are proud to be on boards, and they feel that, well, I just show up and kind of share my brilliance or my experience. And it's kind of like a dream. Like, it's so awesome to think that you could be so smart, insightful, knowledgeable, that you can just show up and, like, your presence just gives the right answers, but you've got to do the work.
Yeah.
And
million percent.
And I love that you're saying that, because you would think that, if there's someone that doesn't have to do the work, that would be you. And you're the first one to say, you've got to do the work. So thank you for that. So let's see if I can take it a step even deeper. So you're having a conversation with a CEO or their management team, and you're trying to build trust and understanding. How do you do that?
Yeah. I think it involves a lot of listening, and being genuinely interested in where the person's coming from and what they're trying to do. I think most people struggle. A lot of people who are in leadership positions, and I don't want to say most, but a lot of people that I deal with, they struggle with kind of this in the box, out of the box idea. And I'm blanking on the name of the consultancy and book that kind of talks about this idea, but it's this idea as a leader, you want to look at your people as people first and as tools second. And where we get into a lot of trouble is seeing people as a means to an end rather than as human beings. And this is kind of in the box or out of the box idea of how you view what's going on. And so for me, the people I work with, I care for them a lot because we're partners in what we're doing, and I want to understand where they're coming from as human beings. And so I'm genuinely interested what's going right, what's going wrong, both in their life, both personally and professionally. Do a lot of listening, understanding where they're coming from, being a trusted person that hopefully they can share things with, and know that, I'm going to accept them as a person for all their, for all their good and bad. And just be a human being with them. So I tend to be a person who's learned how to view the world that way, rather than seeing people as a means to an end. I see them as, partners in what we're doing. And, when we spend time together, I'm genuinely interested. What's going on in their life? What's going right? What's going wrong? One of my buddies, who I work with professionally, and I guess I call him a buddy now, but like we work professionally, and like has been going through some tough stuff with their kid, right? Like, it's important for me to understand that and know that there's bigger things than how much money we make this week. And so, that's how I think about it. And that's how I think you build that fundamental level of trust with people. And it's listening, asking questions, but also like not just going through the motions, which I think people do, and it comes across as fake. Like, you have to genuinely be interested and care about the other person. And that's how you build that relationship and trust, and be there for them. And I think once you have that understanding of where they're coming from, then you have the ability, when tough stuff happens, like, do you live the core values of being a servant leader or not? Do you stand by them? Do you throw them under the bus? Do you be a partner for them and be there when they need you? Yeah, then you're going to build that level of trust, because they know they can depend on you, and that you're a type of person that's going to not let them down.
It's so easily said, but a little bit more challenging to do, right? Because at the end of the day, you said, hey, I care about outcomes and results. And at the same time, you care about people and you're curious about them. And at the same time, they don't see you as a threat. They see you as a partner, right? As somebody that is going to help them. So there's like, how are you able to manage the, we want outcomes, but I care about you, and I'm not here to judge you or evaluate you. Again, I mean, you could care for someone as a friend, and it's like, well, I don't care how they do in business, but you also care about how they do in business. So what's the trick there? Like, how can you separate the caring, their best interest, and performance?
Yeah, 100%. Well, and I think you talked about the right balance, right? And there's, obviously, we all have to make sacrifices in life to make things happen. Like, I think you and I would rather not work at all. We could just hang out with our family and have tons of fun. But like, there's a balance there that needs to happen in anything. And so, it does start from before, when you find the right people to be on the team, or do you have the right kind of perspective there? And for example, there are times when I tell my family, like, sorry, I'm not gonna be home for this holiday, right? Or I've got to go do I got to step out for 30 minutes to support a team member during this important thing, right? And there's a balance there to where we do that. And that's where I think, in dealing with team members, there'll be times when I say stuff like, hey, like, you should go take a vacation, like, you're working too hard, or like, hey, that sounds really bad, like your mother died, like, go, make your best decision, but we're fine if you want to leave for 2 weeks, right? And look at you as a human being. And so I don't know if I'm answering your question or not, but it's really just making sure, you find the people who are going to be culturally aligned with how I think about stuff. Like, there's a balance, like, you have to sacrifice some, but not too much. And in the end, like, when really important stuff matters in life, getting sick, or something's wrong with, you're a family member, or you need a day off and you got to make it happen. Like, go do that. That stuff's more important, or your kid's graduating, like, the business meeting can wait. And so, I think there's a balance there, and it just gets out on a case by case basis. And I feel like I've done a good job recruiting people that are culturally aligned with an appropriate level of sacrifice and pushing up, but not too much. So I don't know if I'm answering your question or not.
Well, I think you did. I think, you're there for them, you care for them, and you want to make sure that they are the right person for the job. And if they aren't, that doesn't mean they're any lesser humans. That might just be that might not be working to their strengths, and that might not be in their place. But you start by caring about them and wanting their best. And I think that makes the world a difference, because when you want the best for someone, then you can be that friend to them, to say, it's like, look, you're in a bad relationship right now. You might be you're in a bad relationship with your job. And you can genuinely say that.
Right.
One of the things I think, like, if you ask me what's one of the most difficult things that I do as a coach, is to help people that kind of see people more as tools and then as people. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they're bad people, evil or money grabbing. It's just that for whatever different reasons, which might take me a couple of hours to explain, right? Some people are just so focused on the outcome and the production that they forget about people. And then they're not very genuine. They'll follow the steps, they'll follow the process. It's like, hey, if I do this, I get that outcome, then I'm going to try it, but then they're not really genuine. So you've got to find different approaches and different ways about it. Have you ever had a situation where you've got to team people up? Like, for example, you've got someone that is, but I hate to kind of call people tools at any time, but somebody that is looking more at the outcomes and looking people as resources, and someone that is like more people caring, and you kind of have to build a team, kind of bring some balance. Have you ever had anything like that? Or you're like, no, if you're not, really people driven or care about people, you shouldn't be in my team?
Yeah, it's been interesting. I think there a lot of times when you run into leaders who perhaps are optimized to see people as objects rather than human beings, it's one thing to go to those leaders and say, oh, hey, you just need to get like huggier and like see the world differently. And like, especially when you're dealing with a more mature person, maybe somebody closer to our age in their 40s or 50s, like, I've learned enough trying to change people, men in their 60s and 70s, to change their mind on anything. Like it's just not really worth your time. Like, don't do it. And just try to craft a situation around them to make them more successful. I've actually seen times where through coaching, leaders who have looked at the world in this way, we've created systems to make it almost automatic for them to have to slow down and see people as human beings versus objects. And so they'll do things like, it gets into their standard one-on-one meeting template. There are, systematized employee feedback, and pulses that go out as well. And that forces a leader to show those numbers and see what's happening with employee morale. So you can just basically kind of that idea of every person has their strengths and weaknesses. And that's what you get when you hire a leader. And your job as a board chairman, as a leader, is to recognize those weaknesses and then potentially craft systems to make those a non-issue, right? And so we've done that in the past. A second thing that I've seen happen is there are people who are not necessarily destined to be senior leaders, but they like being part of the leadership team, who are, I would describe as kind of emotional glue. They end up being very good. They're like that person that you see on the leadership team that like everybody knows and knows everybody's secrets because they talks to them and trusts them because they're a people person. And that person tends to, without even knowing it, run around inside of the organization and like deal with boogers and tears. That's the way I kind of describe it, like crying and people getting stressed out, or like translating when a leader says something and it hurts their feelings. Be like, no, I don't think Jim meant that. Like, let's go talk to him. And like, they walk him in there and like, coaching everybody in the background. So, both the systems and the team composition can make a difference there, but it all starts with the leader being coachable and being aware of kind of where they're weak and where they're strong, and being okay with like, hey, this is just how you're wired. Nothing wrong with it. Like, let's build a system around you that's going to help you thrive. And, good leaders are totally comfortable with that.
I think you mentioned something super well. Again, you give us so much every time you say something, right? But you've got the on one hand, you've got the team, right? In understanding that there's different people inside the team that play different roles, and you kind of have to have those different people.
Yeah.
So as you said, like, hey, maybe it's not top level management, but they are the glue inside the organization, and they help support in these different ways. And it's important to recognize that there's different roles to be played inside the team and inside the organization. And the other thing that is like coachable. I believe that what makes somebody coachable is their real desire and commitment to growing and evolving, which means that they are open. So it's like, okay, maybe I see people more as resources than people, but part of my development has to do with learning how to do that better. You have that openness, and once you have that openness, then you can work with them, teach them, show them a lot. And just real important thought. I think that at the end of the day, people want to help other people, and just sometimes we forget. And I think that one of our roles as leaders to kind of help remind them what they're here to accomplish and what they're here to do. So thank you for kind of opening it up to that conversation. So You talked a lot about systems and tools. You've kind of given us a few. Are there any like go-to systems, tools, exercises that you're like, man, everyone in the organization should do this with their team or should use this tool? I know it's kind of a broad question, but I just wonder if there's like, anything in your back pocket that you're like, man, here's something that'll be valuable to everyone.
Yeah, or if I have to pick one of the kind of 10 systems that I recommend out of the playbook to people and where to start is to do one of the business operating systems, as soon as possible. That's the very first thing to do. You do, an EOS or a scaling up or a great game of business, just pick one. Any of them are going to be good versus not having a system at all. And that solves the majority of the first things you should go after when you're trying to run a business well. And that's, how do we do visioneering? How do we get aligned on strategy? How do we compete in the market? What does our meeting cadence look like? How do we run meetings? How do we solve problems? How do we track goals and how do we set them? You get a cadence from all of those kind of systems that I think is super powerful. So, the one we like the most is EOS. It's the easiest to self-implement. Scaling up is another one that people like. You just got to pick one and go with it. Some of it is, I recommend just pick whichever one your friends are doing mostly. Me and most of my friends do EOS. And the best thing about it all comes from the price of like a $12 book off of Amazon. It's not easy to implement, but man, it's the one thing that I've seen just repeatedly transform companies.
You can hire someone like me and I'll help you implement it much faster and
Oh yeah,
save you
I
a
didn't
lot
know
of time.
are you an EOS implementer? Or I
I'm,
didn't know
I'm,
that.
I'm not an EOS. I use some of the EOS technology, some of the scaling up technology, some of the metronomics technology, a few different operating systems. I realized that you got to figure out where the company is and give them what they need.
Yeah, 100%.
Versus a cookie cutter approach. But what you're saying is totally true. You got to start somewhere, and you've got to start working on the macro systems. That's kind of how I describe it. And I think that sometimes businesses are so busy doing the day-to-day work that they forget to align on the things that are really going to help them move forward. Any specific like leadership tool, like is there something you do in your meetings in particular, or doing reviews with people, anything that kind of comes up in terms of how do you help people get the direction that they need or do course correction?
Yeah, I think that's really the job of the manager to do well. I personally have started to do 360 reviews for all the CEOs that I work most closely with, gather data for them about their performance and identify things to help them set personal and professional goals around things that they want to do. So I've talked about that on my Twitter and my website a bit about how I do that. But just doing that, regular performance review and goal setting is just annoying, but hugely important for personal and professional development. So strongly recommend people do that. A book that I like is called The Effective Manager. It's the best kind of tactical book that I've seen about how to do managing of people when you're a non-manager. So that would be part of the playbook that I would encourage people to check out. But again, it's just like most of us don't even do that kind of stuff. You'll see businesses who don't even have team meetings, right? Or don't even have aren't even doing any of the more sophisticated stuff like one-on-ones or annual performance reviews. So just doing it is going to be transformative for you as a leader in your company.
So focus on those meetings, right? There's so much we could talk about meetings running them well and having them well organized. But you're saying, hey, you see a lot of businesses that don't have the disciplined macro processes in the flow of the organizational work, and you're saying that's kind of where you have to start.
100%. Yeah, get the fundamentals right.
Perfect. Michael, I think it starts with this idea that you saw leadership in your family. By the way, we didn't mention that you're a third generation entrepreneur, which, according to the statistics, they're the ones that are supposed to screw up the businesses, but not in your case. So thank you for that.
So far, I still got time.
We talked about servant leadership as kind of like your major principle in how you work with people and others, and how you're here to serve them and help them grow, help them evolve, help them be better. You talked about kind of taking walks in the woods and really following kind of Simon Sinek and his concept of starting with why and really understanding your personal purpose. And we didn't talk much about this, but I've seen it in your communication, in your messaging, in your LinkedIn. You're like, look, my greatest contributions are going to be from helping business and create new products and services and industries, and really sticking to it. So very consistent there. You're looking for self-aware. I mean, you have a lot of self-awareness, which helps you find at the feedback that you need to continue to become better and identify your growth opportunities, find different perspectives. And you kind of mentioned that everybody needs that, because we all want to get better, and we can't kind of get better just by ourselves. Really interesting concept, right? I had never thought about this idea, but kind of school forms our thinking and mindset about, you got it right, you got it wrong, you're supposed to know things. And then we go into business and we think we're supposed to do it the same. And business just does not work quite like that. It is very, very different. And if we don't adapt and really understand how business works versus the educational system that we have, we're going to screw up. We talked about the importance of focusing on your strengths and focusing people on their strengths. They're going to be happier, they're going to be healthier, they're going to contribute more, and you need to spend more time with the managers that are doing a great job to make them even better, and not so much time with those that are struggling and are kind of not working out just to make them mediocre, which is not in their best interest either. You talked about how you spent a lot of time developing cultural systems and really understanding what it takes to implement culture well in organizations. And you mentioned culture by design as a resource that you're going to be following, focusing on the 25 behaviors that you're expecting from your people and your team everywhere, and how can you work through those and identify them. And they don't have to be very complex or sophisticated ideas. They can just be straightforward, but you're expecting them from everyone. You talked about systems. I really love the idea of going out there and spending a year or two really solving these big issues that you're going to see in business everywhere, and kind of solving it once and for all, and making sure that it's being used. And if anybody has any ideas on how to make it better, then great. But first use it, then we make it better, and then we all use the better version of it, right? And then recognizing that there's a bunch of businesses. I mean, most businesses suffer from the same big issues, and that people can go to your website and see what you've solved already, right? You've got a bunch of tools to help solve those big issues, and don't waste your time reinventing the wheel when somebody else has figured it out, right?
100%.
And what I appreciate about your approach is not only somebody's already figured it out because there's a bunch of books on the subject, somebody's actually curated all those books and all those concepts and has narrowed it down for you. Accelerate, right? Saving time in business is so important. Talked about leadership and being a good board member, and it's about the time you put outside the board, working with the CEO, working with the team, understanding them first as human beings, then understanding them as executives and what they want, and building trust, and helping those people understand you're here to help them and support them. You're not there to judge them or evaluate them. So then you can have the real conversations, right? The real challenging ones. And whenever you have to challenge them, no feelings are hurt. And on the other hand, they can come to you with anything that gives you the opportunity to help them best. And it has to be genuine. If you're just going through the motions, it comes out as fake, and actually people probably resent it more than actually appreciate it, right? So you've got to have people in your team that really care about people and don't see them as tools, see them as people first. Otherwise, you're going to end up kind of stuck in that loop of not being genuine, not getting the feedback, not having the evolution that they need, not getting the outcomes, right? Then you kind of left us with this big idea. You need to be working on these macro systems and the operating system for your organization. So, use one of the frameworks that already exists and really implement it as quickly as you can, and implement it as well as you can. And by doing that, you're going to have a solid vision. You're going to figure out how you're going to define strategy, meeting rhythms, hiring, as you mentioned. There's a bunch of things, big systems that you need to have in place. And you also talked about the importance of 360 reviews on your team members and your managers, and getting feedback, because we're not good at having that self-awareness and really knowing what's right and what's wrong in our behaviors. But when you're hearing other people kind of give you this insight and input, you're going to see some consistency, and you're going to be able to adjust your behaviors better. So that, I believe, that's really important, which then is going to make you much better. And then you also referenced the book, The Effective Manager, as a good practical book to really help non-managers become better managers. So yeah, I know I missed a bunch, but those are some of like the big ideas that I kind of took notes on. Did I miss anything that you said that you wanted to repeat, or any other big ideas for our audience out there that's like, wow, okay, I want to be a successful business owner, or I want to kind of be on the board of other businesses, or I want to have a holding company. What did I miss?
I think you covered it all.
Right. Well, I know there's a whole lot more in there, and I know we're pretty short on time. So before I let you go today, what is something good, fun, happy that you're looking forward to here that's coming up for you in the next few weeks or months?
Summertime, it's great. Can't complain. Get to spend time with my kids before they leave. So it's coming. They're teenagers. So it is what it is.
I hear you. Well, Michael, thank you so much for taking the time today. It's been fantastic. I think you've given us a lot to think about. You've given us some great resources, some great tools. So we really appreciate it, and we hope to see you again and get to see how your companies continue to evolve, to see what's the next company that you buy or sell, because always looking at the activity, and you've got plenty of it. So thank you so much.
Appreciate it.